Alright, let's get real for a second. When you hear the name Park Jin-young, you think power, you think empire, you think the man who literally built the kingdom where Rain, 2 p.m., Twice, and Got 7 were born. JYP Entertainment isn't just a company, it's a dynasty, and Park Jin-young is the absolute monarch sitting on that throne. His rules? Legendary. His standards? Ruthless. From his obsession with half air, half sound, vocal technique to his infamous JYP whisper that every trainee must master, this man has controlled every inch of K-pop production for decades. But here's the thing, what happens when you sign a group that doesn't just follow orders? What happens when 8 young men walk into that building and say, we write our own music, we produce our own tracks, and we decide our own identity? That's Stray Kids. The group that literally has self-produced tattooed into their DNA. But the real question is, which members pushed back the hardest? Who looked Park Jin-young in the eye during evaluations and said, no, we're doing it our way? Who quietly resisted behind the scenes, bending the rules without breaking them? And who surprised everyone by standing their ground at the moments nobody expected? This isn't just a ranking. This is the untold story of creative rebellion inside one of K-pop's most powerful institutions. 8 members ranked from the one who kept the peace to the one who practically rewrote JYP's rulebook. Are you ready? Because number 8 might already shock you, and trust me, by the time we reach number 1, everything you thought you knew about Stray Kids and JYP's relationship will be completely flipped upside down. Let's get into it. Number 8. I.N. The quiet storm behind the Magne's smile. Now before you scroll past this and say, of course it's Hyunjin at number 8. He's the baby of the group. He'd never rebel, hold on, because that's exactly the kind of assumption that makes this ranking so dangerous. C. Young Hyunjin, known to the world as I.N, joined JYP Entertainment as a trainee when he was barely old enough to understand what the industry would demand from him. Born on February 8, 2001, in Busan, this kid walked into one of the most high-pressure entertainment companies in South Korea with nothing but raw potential and a voice that hadn't even fully matured yet. And here's the thing that most casual fans forget. During the Stray Kids survival show back in 2017, Hyunjin was actually one of the members who faced elimination. Let that satisfying for a second. The youngest member, the one everyone now adores as the Golden Magne, was told he wasn't ready. Park Jin-young himself looked at this boy and questioned whether he had what it takes to debut. That moment alone could have broken anyone. Imagine being 16 years old, standing in front of the man who controls your entire dream, and hearing him say you might not make the cut. Most trainees would crumble. Most would either silently accept the verdict or desperately try to mold themselves into whatever JYP wanted them to be. But Hyunjin? He did something far more interesting. He internalized it, and he came back sharper. Not with loud defiance, not with dramatic confrontation, but with the kind of quiet determination that's honestly harder to maintain than outright rebellion. And that's exactly why he sits at number 8, not because he never pushed back, but because his form of resistance was so subtle that most people never even noticed it happening. You see, Park Jin-young has this very specific philosophy about vocals. If you've watched any JYP audition or evaluation footage, you know the man is obsessed with what he calls natural emotion in singing. He doesn't want technical perfection. He wants feeling, vulnerability, that breathy quality that makes listeners believe every single word. And for years, Hyunjin struggled with this. His voice was bright, youthful, almost too clean for the gritty, intense sound that Stray Kids was building. JYP's feedback during early evaluations consistently pushed Hyunjin towards softening his delivery, leaning into that signature JYP vocal color. But here's where it gets fascinating. If you track Hyunjin's vocal evolution from debut to now, you'll notice something that doesn't quite align with JYP's playbook. Instead of becoming softer, more restrained, more JYP standard, Hyunjin's voice got stronger, sharper, more powerful. Listen to his parts in Maniac, then go back and listen to his lines in District 9. That's not the same singer following the same set of instructions. That's a vocalist who quietly decided, I respect your guidance, but I'm going to find my own color. And the most brilliant part? He did it so gradually, so respectfully, that it never registered as defiance. There were no dramatic moments, no viral clips of Hyunjin arguing with producers, no backstage tension that leaked to the press. He simply evolved in a direction that was authentically his own while maintaining every ounce of respect for the system he was operating within. In interviews, Hyunjin has always been the member who speaks about JYP Entertainment with genuine gratitude. He's talked about how the training system shaped his discipline, how the evaluations, as brutal as they were, made him better. And that's real. That's not PR talk. You can see it in his eyes when he discusses those early days. But gratitude and compliance are not the same thing, and that's a distinction most people miss. Hyunjin is grateful for the foundation, but he didn't let that foundation become a ceiling. There's a moment from a behind-the-scenes video, and real ones know exactly which one I'm talking about, where the members are reviewing feedback from upper management on a new track, and while everyone else is debating the notes out loud, Hyunjin is quietly in the corner, reworking his vocal take on his own. Not waiting for permission. Not asking for a second opinion. Just doing it. It's a tiny moment, barely 3 seconds of footage, but it tells you everything about how this man operates. He doesn't fight the current, he redirects it. Some fans call him the most obedient member, and on the surface, sure, that label fits. He bows the deepest, he speaks the most formally in professional settings, he follows group protocols without complaint. But obedience and agreement are two very different currencies, and Hyunjin has been spending the latter very selectively. The magne of Stray Kids didn't rebel against Park Jin-young with fire. He did it with patience, with incremental evolution, with a stubbornness so polite that nobody thought to question it until his voice had already transformed into something entirely outside the JYP blueprint. And honestly, that might be the most sophisticated form of rebellion on this entire list. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's undeniable. So yes, I.N sits at number 8, the foundation of this ranking, the quietest revolution, the proof that sometimes the smallest ripple starts the biggest wave. But if you think the magne's subtle evolution was impressive, wait until you hear about the member at number 7, because this one didn't just quietly bend the rules, this one smiled while doing it. And JYP didn't even realize what was happening until it was way too late. Number 7. Felix, the sunshine who burned through JYP's blueprint. Let's talk about the boy who almost never existed in Stray Kids, and no, that's not an exaggeration, that's literally what happened. Lee Yongbok, born September 15, 2000, in Sydney, Australia, walked into JYP Entertainment as a bright-eyed kid from the other side of the world with a dream so big it barely fit inside the walls of that building. And Park Jin-young's system? It almost swallowed him whole. Because here's what people forget when they see Felix now all golden, glowing, baking brownies on Instagram, being everyone's favorite ray of sunshine. This man was eliminated during the Stray Kids survival show. Cut. Removed. Told he wasn't enough. And the reason? His Korean wasn't strong enough. Park Jin-young sat there, looked at this incredibly talented dancer with one of the most unique voices in the entire K-pop industry, and said the language barrier was too much. Think about that for a moment. The man who would later become one of the most recognizable faces in fourth-generation K-pop, whose deep voice would become literally the sonic signature that fans across 190 countries associate with Stray Kids, was almost erased from the story before it even began. But Felix came back, and when he came back, he didn't come back as a reformed trainee who had sanded down all his edges to fit the JYP mold. He came back as Lee Felix from Sydney, Australia, and he made damn sure everyone remembered it. Now here's where the rebellion gets interesting, because Felix's defiance was never confrontational. It was existential. What do I mean by that? Park Jin-young has spent his entire career building a vocal philosophy. The JYP sound is smooth, emotional, controlled. Think about every artist who's ever come out of that company. There's a texture, a color, a specific register that JYP considers ideal. And then Felix opens his mouth, and what comes out is this impossibly deep, resonant, almost baritone rumble that sounds like velvet dragged across gravel. That voice doesn't exist anywhere in the JYP handbook. It's not half air, half sound. It's not the breathy emotional delivery that Park Jin-young has preached for 20 plus years. It's something completely, utterly, fundamentally different, and Felix never once tried to change it. That's the rebellion right there. In an industry where trainees are literally trained to modify their vocal color, where coaches spend hours adjusting tone and placement to fit a company's brand identity, Felix showed up with a voice that broke every rule in the book and essentially said, "This is what you're getting." And the wild part? There were moments, documented moments in early Stray Kids content, where you can hear that the production team didn't quite know what to do with his voice. Early tracks sometimes buried his lines, gave him shorter parts, tried to blend him into the group's overall sound rather than letting him stand out. But Felix kept pushing. Not with arguments, not with demands, but simply by being so authentically himself that the music eventually had to bend around him instead of the other way around. Go listen to Red Lights. Go listen to his parts in Thunderous. Go listen to the way his voice anchors S-Class. That's not a vocalist who adjusted to fit a system. That's a system that adjusted to fit a vocalist, and in the world of JYP Entertainment, that's practically revolutionary. But the vocal thing is only half the story. Felix's cultural identity is the other battlefield where his quiet rebellion played out in ways most fans don't fully appreciate. When you enter a Korean entertainment company as a foreigner, there's an unspoken expectation: assimilate. Learn the language, adopt the customs, minimize anything that makes you too different. And Felix did learn Korean, obviously. He worked incredibly hard at it, and his fluency now is remarkable considering where he started. But here's what he didn't do. He didn't erase Australia. He didn't stop being the kid from Sydney. His English doesn't just slip out accidentally in interviews. It flows out naturally because he refuses to compartmentalize his identity. When he says mate on camera, when he references Australian culture, when he code switches between Korean and English mid-sentence with that unmistakable Aussie lilt, he's not being careless, he's making a statement. He's saying, I can be a K-pop idol and still be Felix from Down Under, and those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. In a company culture where uniformity has historically been the price of admission, that kind of identity preservation is a bigger deal than people realize. And JYP, to his credit, eventually stopped trying to sand that edge off. But it wasn't because Park Jin-young suddenly had a change of heart about cultural assimilation. It was because Felix's authenticity became commercially undeniable. His deep voice became a viral trademark. His Australian warmth became the group's emotional anchor. His refusal to be anything other than exactly who he has turned him into one of the most beloved idols on the planet. The system didn't change Felix. Felix changed what the system was willing to accept, and he did it with a smile so warm that nobody even realized they were being moved. There's this moment, and if you're a stay, you've probably rewatched it 100 times, where Felix is doing a fan call and someone asks him what makes him different from other idols, and without missing a beat, he says something along the lines of, I don't try to be different, I just try to be me. And that's it. That's the entire thesis of Felix's rebellion compressed into one sentence. He didn't fight JYP's system with resistance, he overwhelmed it with authenticity. He didn't argue about vocal techniques or training methods. He just showed up every single day as the most genuinely, unapologetically Felix version of himself possible, and the system had no choice but to make room. That's why he's at number 7, because his rebellion wasn't strategic, it was organic, and somehow that made it even more powerful. But now, if you think Felix's authentic existence was a quiet earthquake inside JYP, you're absolutely not prepared for number 6, because this next member didn't just preserve their identity. They actively weaponized their perfectionism in ways that made the entire production team rethink how feedback actually works in that building. Number 6. Seungmin. The perfectionist who rewrote the rules of feedback. Here's a name that might surprise you at this spot, and honestly, that's exactly why this ranking hits different, because the members you'd least expect to push back are sometimes the ones doing it in the most surgically precise way possible. Kim Seungmin, born September 22, 2000, is the member that most K-pop analysts would describe as the model trainee. Clean vocals, disciplined work ethic, respectful demeanor, the kind of idol who bows at exactly the right angle and never misses a cue during live broadcasts. On paper, Seungmin is everything the JYP system was designed to produce: polished, reliable, technically proficient, the textbook definition of what a well-trained vocalist should look and sound like. And that right there is the trap, because Seungmin didn't become the textbook, he became the one editing it. Let me give you some context that most people outside the deep stay fandom don't know. Seungmin didn't audition for JYP Entertainment because he wanted to be a generic idol. He auditioned because of Day 6. Specifically, because of Young K and the kind of raw, emotionally honest musicianship that Day 6 represented within JYP's roster. That's a crucial detail because it tells you exactly what Seungmin's artistic North Star was from day one, not the polished, manufactured perfection that JYP's training system traditionally emphasizes, but something grittier. Something more rooted in genuine musical craftsmanship. So when he entered the trainee system and started receiving vocal coaching under JYP's methodology, there was already a tension baked into the equation. The company wanted to shape him into their mold. Seungmin wanted to become something that the mold hadn't accounted for. And unlike members who rebel through personality or attitude, Seungmin's weapon of choice was precision. Pure, relentless, almost intimidating precision. See, the way feedback works in a Korean entertainment company, and this is something that outsiders rarely understand, is fundamentally top-down. The producers speak, the trainees listen, adjustments are made. End of conversation. It's not a dialogue, it's a directive. Park Jin-young himself has talked about this dynamic in interviews. He believes that his decades of experience give him the authority to make calls about vocal delivery, performance style, and artistic direction. And trainees are expected to absorb that guidance without excessive pushback. It's not cruel, it's just the culture of the industry. But Seungmin introduced something into that equation that the system wasn't built to handle: counter-analysis. What does that mean? It means that when a vocal coach or a producer gave Seungmin a note, he didn't just accept it or reject it. He dissected it. He asked why. Not in a disrespectful way, not with attitude or defiance, but with the calm, methodical curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to understand the musical reasoning behind every single piece of feedback he received. And if the reasoning didn't hold up to his own understanding of music theory and vocal technique, he'd propose an alternative. Not a vague, I think it should be different, a specific, technically grounded alternative with reasoning attached. Think about how disruptive that is in a system designed for one-way communication. You've got a trainee, not a senior producer, not a veteran songwriter, a trainee walking into feedback sessions with his own analysis prepared, ready to engage in what is essentially a peer-level discussion about vocal arrangement. In any other company, that might get you labeled as difficult. At JYP, where the founder's artistic authority is practically sacred, it's borderline heretical. But here's the genius of Seungmin's approach. He never made it personal, and he never made it confrontational. He framed every counter-proposal as a question of craft, not a challenge to authority. I understand why you'd want this phrasing here, but would it serve the emotional arc of the song better if we shifted the emphasis to the syllable instead? That's not rebellion in the traditional sense. That's a chess move. It's intellectually asserting your artistic perspective while maintaining plausible deniability. I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just exploring the possibilities. And over time, that approach didn't just change how the production team interacted with Seungmin, it changed how they interacted with the entire group. Because once one member establishes that feedback can be a two-way conversation, the door is open for everyone. There's a behind-the-scenes clip from one of their album recording sessions, and the real fans have analyzed this frame by frame, where Seungmin is in the vocal booth, and he does a take that the producer approves. It's good. It's clean. It meets the brief. But Seungmin asks to do it again. Not because the producer asked for another take, but because he heard something in his own delivery that didn't meet his standard. His standard. Not JYP's standard, not the producer's standard, his own internal benchmark that he's built through years of obsessive study and self-evaluation. And the take he delivers the second time? Different. Subtly different, but meaningfully different. A slight shift in where he places the breath, a tiny adjustment in the emotional weight of a particular vowel. The kind of change that only someone with an almost pathological attention to vocal detail would even notice, let alone fight for. And that right there is what makes Seungmin's rebellion so fascinating. It's not about defying authority, it's about exceeding it. He doesn't push back against JYP standards because he thinks they're too high. He pushes back because he thinks they're not high enough, or more accurately, because he thinks his own standards are more precise. In concert settings, you can see this play out in real time. Watch Seungmin during any live performance and compare his delivery to the studio version. Where other members might simplify or adapt their parts for the live stage, Seungmin is actively trying to surpass the recorded version. Every single time. That's not the behavior of a compliant trainee executing instructions. That's an artist who has taken ownership of his craft to a degree that the company framework can't fully contain. And the most quietly devastating part of all of this? Seungmin's perfectionism has made it essentially impossible for the production team to give him notes he hasn't already given himself. By the time feedback reaches him, he's already identified the issue, analyzed it, and prepared 3 possible solutions. He didn't just learn the JYP system, he outpaced it, and he did it so methodically, so respectfully, so thoroughly, that challenging him on a vocal decision became less of a correction and more of a debate between equals. That's the kind of rebellion that doesn't make headlines, but it reshapes the entire power dynamic of a creative environment from the inside out. So Seungmin holds number 6, the perfectionist who didn't break the feedback system, but quietly made it evolve. But if Seungmin's surgical precision shook the studio walls, wait until you hear about number 5, because this member didn't just question the feedback, they questioned the entire concept of what a Stray Kids performance should look like. And they did it on stages so big that JYP couldn't look away even if he wanted to. Number 5, Hyunjin, the artist who turned the stage into his own canvas. Alright, let's shift gears completely, because up until now, we've been talking about rebellions that happened in vocal booths, in quiet corners of practice rooms, in the subtle spaces between feedback and execution. But number 5? Number 5 took his rebellion and painted it across the biggest stages on the planet where millions of eyes were watching, and there was absolutely nowhere to hide. Hyunjin, born March 20th, 2000, is the member that JYP Entertainment probably thought they had figured out from the very beginning. Visuals? Flawless. The kind of face that casting directors dream about, the kind of proportions that make stylists weep with joy. When Hyunjin walked into JYP as a trainee, the company saw what every entertainment agency sees when they encounter someone who looks like that, a front-center visual. A poster boy, someone who would photograph beautifully and fill the face of the group. Role that every K-pop act needs. And that's where the first crack in the plan appeared, because Hyunjin had absolutely zero interest in being just a pretty face, and he made that clear not with words, but with movement. You need to understand something about the JYP choreography philosophy to appreciate what Hyunjin did. JYP Entertainment has historically valued synchronization above individual expression. Watch any JYP group perform 2 p.m., GOT7, twice, and you'll notice that the choreography prioritizes clean lines, sharp formations, and group unity. Every member hits the beat at exactly the same millisecond. Every arm extends to exactly the same angle. Every formation shift happens with military precision. It's beautiful, it's impressive, and it's absolutely intentional. Park Jin-young has spoken openly about how he believes K-pop choreography should serve the group, not the individual. The group is the star. The formation is the art. The individual is a component. Now imagine telling that to Hyunjin, a human being whose body literally speaks a different language than everyone else in the room. Because Hyunjin doesn't dance like a K-pop idol. He never has. From his earliest pre-debut videos to his most recent concert fan cams, there is something fundamentally different about the way this man occupies space on a stage. Where the choreography says hit, Hyunjin flows. Where the formation says stop, Hyunjin extends. Where every other member reaches the endpoint of a move and holds, Hyunjin adds a half-second of extra motion, a finger trailing through the air, a head roll that wasn't in the original choreo. A weight shift that turns a standard 8 count into something that feels like contemporary art. And in the JYP system, where synchronization is gospel, that kind of individual embellishment is essentially a form of creative disobedience. It's not that Hyunjin can't synchronize. Watch any Stray Kids music show performance, and you'll see he hits every mark perfectly when the moment demands it. It's that he chooses to add layers that exist outside the choreographer's blueprint, and he does it so beautifully that no one can tell him to stop without admitting that his version looks better than the original plan. That's the power move right there. That's the rebellion. How do you discipline someone for making the performance objectively more captivating? How do you tell an artist to stop being artistic when the audience is literally screaming louder during his parts because of those unauthorized additions? JYP's system was designed to contain that kind of individuality, and Hyunjin essentially made containment impossible by being too good at what he was doing differently. But let's go deeper than the dancing, because Hyunjin's artistic rebellion extends into territory that most K-pop idols, especially those from Big Four companies, would never dare to touch. This man is a painter. Not celebrity who dabbles in art for content. Painter, a genuine, serious, emotionally invested visual artist who has exhibited work, who spends hours in his studio creating pieces that have nothing to do with Stray Kids or K-pop or fan service. And that matters in the context of JYP Entertainment because the company's traditional model is total brand integration. Everything an idol does, their hobbies, their social media, their public persona, is expected to feed back into the group's brand identity. Your personal interests should be marketable. Your individuality should be packageable. And Hyunjin's art? It's neither. His paintings are raw, abstract, emotionally intense, the kind of work that doesn't translate neatly into Instagram aesthetics or variety show segments. They're not cute idol tries painting content. They're legitimate artistic expression from someone who clearly sees himself as more than the role the industry assigned him. And he has never, not once, apologized for that or tried to dilute it for mass consumption. When he shares his artwork, he shares it on his terms, with his context in his framing. That's a quiet but unmistakable act of creative sovereignty in an environment that typically demands every aspect of an idol's life be filtered through the company's brand lens. There's also the way Hyunjin approaches fashion, and this is something that subtly drove the styling team into uncharted territory. JYP's styling historically leans toward clean, accessible, broadly appealing looks, nothing too avant-garde, nothing too polarizing, nothing that might alienate the mainstream Korean audience. But Hyunjin gravitates toward fashion that's edgier, more gender-fluid, more boundary-pushing than the traditional JYP aesthetic would typically allow. The harnesses, the sheer fabrics, the styling choices that lean into androgyny and high-fashion editorial rather than safe, commercial idol styling, those aren't random. Those are Hyunjin's fingerprints on a visual identity that the company's original blueprint didn't include. And over time, Stray Kids' entire visual brand shifted to accommodate what Hyunjin was bringing to the table. The group's styling got bolder. The performance outfits got more experimental. The creative direction of music videos started incorporating more artistic, visually daring elements. Hyunjin didn't just rebel against the existing aesthetic, he expanded what the aesthetic was allowed to be, and the entire group's visual identity evolved as a result. And perhaps the most powerful dimension of Hyunjin's rebellion is how he handled his hiatus period. Without getting into specifics that have been discussed endlessly elsewhere, Hyunjin stepped away from the group, and when he came back transformed. Not humbled in the way the industry typically demands, where the returning idol is expected to be quieter, smaller, more grateful, more compliant, but evolved. More artistically confident. More creatively assertive. More unapologetically himself. His performances post-return carry a weight, an emotional gravity that wasn't there before, and it's the kind of depth that you only develop when you've faced the darkest version of an industry that commodifies human beings and decided, I'm coming back as an artist, not a product. Park Jin-young's system creates idols. Hyunjin decided he was going to be an artist who happens to be an idol, and that distinction, that insistence on a creative identity that transcends the commercial framework, is what puts him at number 5. He didn't rebel with complaints or confrontations. He rebelled with beauty, with art, with a physical vocabulary so expressive that the choreography had to evolve around him instead of constraining him. So Hyunjin holds this spot, the artist who is too visually captivating to be corrected, too creatively expansive to be contained. But if you think turning a stage into a personal gallery was bold, you're genuinely not ready for number 4, because this next member didn't just push creative boundaries on stage. They pushed emotional boundaries in the studio so hard that entire songs were rewritten because of what they refused to hold back. Number 4, Han, the emotional volcano who refused to write safe lyrics. Now we're entering the zone where the rebellion stops being subtle and starts leaving scorch marks on the studio walls, because Han Ji-sung didn't tiptoe around JYP's boundaries. He wrote straight through them with a pen that bled so much raw honesty it made entire rooms uncomfortable. Born September 14, 2000, Han is one of those rare cases in K-pop where the gap between idol persona and actual human being is practically non-existent, and that's not an accident. That's a deliberate, conscious, almost aggressive artistic choice that put him on a collision course with JYP's content philosophy from the very first song he ever submitted. Let's set the scene properly, because this matters. When Stray Kids was being formed, when 3RACHA, the legendary production trio of Bangchan, Changbin, and Han, was still just 3 trainees making music in cramped studios after hours, Han was already doing something that nobody at JYP Entertainment had quite seen before from someone his age. He was writing lyrics about darkness. Not metaphorical, poetic, safely abstracted darkness, real darkness. The kind that talks about anxiety like it's a living creature sitting on your chest. The kind that describes emotional suffocation with imagery so vivid you can feel the walls closing in just reading the words. The kind that names depression not as a distant concept, but as a daily companion that follows you into practice rooms and sits next to you during evaluations. And in 2017, 2018, when Stray Kids was being built, that kind of lyrical content was essentially forbidden territory in mainstream K-pop. You need to understand the landscape at that time. K-pop lyrics were expected to be aspirational, romantic, energetic, or at most, vaguely melancholic in a way that was aesthetically beautiful but never truly uncomfortable. JYP Entertainment especially had a brand reputation built on positivity, on clean images, on music that made people feel good. Twice was dominating with songs about falling in love. Day 6 was exploring emotional territory, but within carefully constructed boundaries. GOT7 was delivering sleek, confident bangers. And then here comes 17-year-old Han Ji-sung sliding a sheet of paper across the table with lyrics that essentially say, I hear voices in my head and some days I don't know if I can keep going. Imagine being a JYP executive reading that. Imagine the meeting where someone had to look at this kid and say, this is too much. We can't debut a group with lyrics this heavy. The Korean public isn't ready. The parents of our fan base will be concerned. The broadcast standards might flag this. And that conversation happened. Maybe not in those exact words, but the pushback against the emotional intensity of 3RACHA's early material is well documented in the subtext of multiple interviews and behind-the-scenes moments. There were rewrites requested. There were tonal adjustments suggested. There were entire verses flagged as too dark or too personal or not commercially viable for a debut group. And Han? Han fought for every single line. Not all of them survived. That's the reality of working within a corporate structure, and anyone who tells you otherwise is romanticizing the industry. But an extraordinary number of them did survive, and the ones that made it through did so because Han refused to accept the sanitized alternatives. There's a difference between compromise and capitulation, and Han understood that difference instinctively. When a producer said, "This line is too intense," Han didn't cave and write something generic. He'd rework the imagery just enough to technically satisfy the note while preserving the emotional core that made the line matter in the first place. It's like negotiating with a censor. You change the words, but keep the wound, and by the time the revised version is approved, it still hits just as hard because the truth underneath never moved. Listen to Voices carefully. Listen to Elevator. Listen to Maze of Memories. These aren't songs that a sanitized, corporate-approved lyrical process would produce. These are songs that survived a gauntlet of revision requests because one 19-year-old rapper looked at one of the most powerful men in Korean entertainment and essentially communicated, if you take the pain out of these lyrics, you take the truth out of this group, and without truth, Stray Kids has no reason to exist. That's not a small stand to take. That's a foundational artistic declaration that shaped the entire identity of the group moving forward. And it's not just about the dark themes, it's about the specificity. JYP's lyrical philosophy, historically, favors universality. Write about love in a way that everyone can project themselves onto. Write about struggle in a way that's broad enough to be a motivational poster. Keep it relatable, but keep it safe. Han's writing does the exact opposite. It's hyper-specific, almost uncomfortably personal, written from a first-person perspective that doesn't leave room for comfortable distance. When Han writes about anxiety, he's not writing a metaphor that could apply to anyone. He's writing about his anxiety, his panic attacks, his specific experience of sitting in a JYP practice room at 2 a.m. wondering if the person he's becoming is someone he even recognizes. That level of autobiographical vulnerability in K-pop lyrics was practically unheard of when Stray Kids debuted, and it happened because Han insisted on it against institutional resistance. There's also the speed factor, and this is something that quietly drove the production hierarchy crazy in the best possible way. Han writes fast. Not just fast, impossibly fast. There are verified accounts from members and producers describing sessions where Han would produce complete, polished, emotionally devastating lyrics in 20 minutes, while everyone else in the room was still brainstorming concepts. And when you write that fast and that consistently, you create a volume problem for gatekeepers. Because how do you quality control someone who produces 3 potential title tracks in the time it takes to review one? How do you maintain editorial oversight when the creative output is flowing faster than the approval pipeline can process? Han essentially overwhelmed the system with sheer creative velocity, flooding the process with so much material that the gatekeepers had to start picking battles rather than reviewing everything with a fine-tooth comb. That's not just talent, that's a strategy, whether he intended it as one or not. The result is that more raw, unfiltered Han material made it into Stray Kids' discography than would have been possible if he'd been a slower, more methodical writer who submitted one carefully crafted piece at a time for thorough review. And then there's the mental health dimension, which might be the most significant rebellion of all. Han has been publicly open about his struggles with anxiety and panic attacks, not in a carefully managed PR statement, not in a scripted interview segment, but in raw, real-time moments that the company couldn't have fully anticipated or controlled. When Han talked about his mental health on camera, he wasn't following a JYP-approved talking points memo. He was being a human being in an industry that historically treats vulnerability as a liability, and every time he did it, he made it harder for the company to maintain the illusion that its artists are invincible performance machines who exist solely to entertain. That kind of emotional honesty isn't just personal bravery, it's institutional rebellion, because it challenges the foundational myth that K-pop companies sell to the public, that their idols are superhuman, that the system works perfectly, that everyone is fine and happy and grateful all the time. Han cracked that facade with his bare hands, and he did it through lyrics and honest interviews that reached millions of people who were feeling the same things and had never heard a K-pop idol say it out loud. So Han sits at number 4, the emotional volcano who refused to let the industry dilute his pain into something palatable, who wrote so fast and so honestly that the corporate filter couldn't catch everything, who turned personal darkness into the artistic identity that makes Stray Kids resonate on a level that most K-pop acts never reach. But if Han's lyrical rawness shook the content guidelines, brace yourself for number 3, because this member didn't just challenge what could be said in a song, they challenged how the entire sonic architecture of Stray Kids should be constructed. And they did it with a technical ferocity that left even Park Jin-young struggling to find a counterargument. Number 3, Lino, the man who simply refused to perform the idol script. Okay, we've officially crossed the threshold into the top 3, and if you've made it this far, I need you to understand the air is different up here. The members at number 8 through number 4 pushed boundaries within the system. The members in the top 3? They fundamentally questioned whether the system applied to them at all. And nobody embodies that energy more terrifyingly, more casually, more beautifully than Lee Mi-ho, the man the world knows as Lee No, born October 25, 1998. The member who walked into JYP Entertainment having already tasted the industry from the other side and decided, with absolute clarity, that he was going to do this thing entirely on his own terms or not at all. Let's start with the backstory that changes everything about how you understand this man, because before Lee No was Lee No, before Stray Kids existed, before any of this, Mi-ho was a backup dancer for BTS. Let that fact recalibrate your entire understanding of his relationship with the K-pop industry. This isn't someone who entered JYP as a wide-eyed trainee with no frame of reference. This is someone who had already stood on the biggest stages in the world, who had already seen how the machine operates from the inside, who had already experienced the hierarchy, the exhaustion, the politics, and the reality of what it means to exist in the K-pop ecosystem, and then chose to re-enter that system as a trainee, at the bottom of the food chain, at a different company, starting from zero. That kind of person doesn't comply easily. That kind of person has already done the math on what the industry demands and what it gives back, and they've decided that the equation only works if they maintain control over the variables they can influence. And from the moment Mi-ho entered JYP Entertainment, it was clear that his primary variable was authenticity, a complete, non-negotiable refusal to perform the idol personality that the K-pop system requires. Because here's the dirty secret of the idol industry that nobody talks about openly. There's a script. Not a literal written document, but a behavioral template that every trainee absorbs through osmosis during their training period. How to laugh on camera. When to be shy versus when to be confident. How to answer fan questions in a way that's endearing but never too revealing. How to maintain the illusion of accessibility while keeping a professional distance. How to be relatable in the very specific, manufactured way that K-pop defines relatability. Every idol learns this script. Most idols perform it so naturally that audiences can't tell the difference between the persona and the person. Lee No never even bothered to memorize his lines. From his very first appearances on camera, during the survival show, during early variety content, during V-Lives and fan interactions, Mi-ho was aggressively, almost confrontationally himself. And himself doesn't look anything like what JYP's PR playbook would have designed. He's blunt. Not charmingly honest in the way K-pop idols are allowed to be blunt, actually blunt, the kind of direct that makes managers watching from the side of the set quietly reach for their phones to text damage control strategies. When a fan asks him a question designed to elicit a sweet, fan service-y response, Mi-ho gives the real answer. When an interviewer sets up a moment for him to be humble and grateful, Mi-ho says something so unexpectedly savage that the other members physically react. When the format of a show requires him to play the cute magne-adjacent role that his visuals could easily support, Mi-ho delivers his lines with a deadpan energy that makes it absolutely clear he's participating under protest. And the thing is, this isn't an act. This isn't a 4D personality character that was workshopped in a meeting room and deployed as a differentiation strategy. This is just who Lee Mi-ho is, and JYP Entertainment had to make a decision very early on about whether they were going to try to sand that down or let it ride. They let it ride, and the reason they let it ride tells you everything about the power dynamics at play. Because Mi-ho's unfiltered authenticity became one of Stray Kids' most valuable assets. In a market saturated with perfectly polished, PR-trained idols who all speak in the same carefully modulated tone of voice, Lee No stood out like a flare in a dark sky. Fans didn't just like his honesty, they craved it. They trusted it. In an industry built on manufactured intimacy, Mi-ho offered something that couldn't be faked, and audiences could feel the difference on a molecular level. JYP couldn't suppress that without destroying one of the group's biggest selling points, and that realization, that commercial reality, gave Mi-ho a shield that most idols never get. He wasn't just being rebellious, he was being profitably rebellious, and that's a kind of armor that no amount of corporate pressure can penetrate. But the personality rebellion is only one layer. The dance dimension is where things get technically fascinating. Lee No is, by any objective measure, one of the most skilled dancers in fourth-generation K-pop. His technique is flawless, his control is absurd, his ability to switch between styles, contemporary, hip-hop, street, traditional, borders on supernatural. And here's the thing that drove JYP's choreography team into genuinely interesting creative territory. Miho doesn't just execute choreography. He edits it in real time based on his own artistic judgment. Not the way Hyunjin adds flourishes and extensions, Miho's edits are structural. He'll shift the timing of a transition by a fraction of a beat because he thinks the movement reads better to an audience at a slightly different tempo. He'll adjust the angle of a formation position because his experience as a backup dancer, standing behind artists and watching how audiences track movement across a stage, taught him something about spatial dynamics that the choreographer didn't account for. These adjustments are so technically precise that they're almost invisible to casual viewers, but dancers and choreographers see them immediately. And the fact that the adjustments consistently improve the performance makes them essentially impossible to criticize. You can't tell a dancer to stop making the choreography better. You can't discipline someone whose rebellion is technically superior execution. It's the same paradox Hyunjin creates, but operating at a completely different level, where Hyunjin adds emotion, Miho adds architecture, and both of them are quietly rebuilding the choreographic framework from the inside, while the music is still playing. And then there's the cat thing, and I know that sounds ridiculous as a point of rebellion, but hear me out because it's actually deeply significant. Miho's entire offstage identity is built around his cats, Sunny, Doonji, and Dory. His social media is dominated by them. His conversations default to them. His emotional energy in public spaces is most genuine when he's talking about them. And in the JYP ecosystem, where an idol's personal brand is expected to serve the group's commercial interests, Miho's absolute refusal to subordinate his cat dad identity to his idol identity is a statement. It's a boundary. It's him saying, there is a version of me that exists completely outside of Stray Kids and completely outside of JYP Entertainment, and I will not let you absorb it into the brand. Other idols have hobbies and interests that are carefully integrated into content strategies, cooking shows, gaming streams, fitness content, all packaged and branded and monetized through official channels. Miho's relationship with his cats exists on his terms, in his space, governed by his rules. The company can feature it, but they don't own it, and that distinction matters enormously to someone who entered the industry having already seen how completely it can consume a person's identity if they let it. That's the rebellion of Lee No, comprehensive, consistent, and operated from a position of such genuine self-knowledge that the system couldn't find leverage against it. He didn't fight JYP's rules by breaking them. He simply lived by his own rules so completely and so publicly that the company's rules became secondary, applicable only in the specific professional contexts where Miho chose to acknowledge them. Everywhere else, he was just Lee Miho, blunt, cat-obsessed, technically brilliant, and absolutely unreachable by the idol machine. Number 3 is earned, respected, and terrifyingly cool. But if Lee No's wholesale rejection of the idol persona shook JYP's behavioral framework to its core, you are categorically not prepared for number 2, because this member didn't just refuse to follow the script, they wrote an entirely new one. Recorded it, produced it, and released it before the company even finished reading the memo. Number 2, Changbin, the sonic architect who made JYP accept noise as art. We're here. Number 2. And if you've been paying attention to this ranking, you've watched the scale of rebellion escalate from quiet personal evolution all the way up to wholesale identity rejection. But number 2 operates on a level that's different from everything that came before, because this isn't about personality, this isn't about performance style, this isn't about fashion or lyrics or attitude. This is about the actual sound of the music itself, the literal sonic DNA of what a JYP Entertainment group is allowed to be, and Seo Changbin, born August 11th, 1999, didn't just push that boundary. He obliterated it, rebuilt it in his own image, and then dared one of the most powerful music executives in Asia to tell him it was wrong. Let's rewind to the beginning, because the context here is everything. Before Stray Kids debuted, JYP Entertainment had a sonic identity that was as recognizable as a fingerprint. If you heard a JYP track on the radio without knowing who was performing, you could identify the company by the production style alone. Smooth. Polished. Rhythmically sophisticated but never aggressive. Vocally driven with productions that prioritized melody over impact. Think twice as bright, addictive hooks. Think got 7 slick R&B influence grooves. Think 2PM's mature but accessible pop R&B. The JYP sound was built on the principle that music should feel good, pleasant, inviting, warm, the sonic equivalent of a door being held open for you. And then CEO Changbin kicked that door off its hinges and replaced it with a wall of distortion. Changbin's approach to music, as a rapper, as a producer, as one-third of the creative engine known as Three-Racha, was fundamentally incompatible with the JYP sonic philosophy from day one. This wasn't a gradual divergence. This wasn't a slow evolution where he started within the template and gradually drifted outward. From his earliest demos, from the very first beats he brought into the studio, Changbin was making music that sounded like it belonged at a rock concert in a basement, not in the pristine halls of JYP Entertainment. Heavy 808s that hit your chest like a physical force. Distorted synths that screamed rather than sang. Rap deliveries so aggressive, so rapid-fire, so unrelentingly intense that they made the vocal coaches in the building visibly uncomfortable. Under his producer alias Spear B, Changbin wasn't just making K-pop, he was making a statement about what K-pop could become if someone was brave enough to stop being polite about it. And here's the moment that defined everything, the early production meetings where Three-Racha brought their demos to JYP's A&R team for review. These meetings are where the future of every track is decided, where company executives listen to demos and determine what gets developed further and what gets shelved. And the feedback Changbin received in those early sessions was consistent, persistent, and direct, too aggressive, too noisy, too harsh. This doesn't sound like JYP. That last part is the key phrase. This doesn't sound like JYP. In the K-pop industry, that sentence is a death sentence for a track. When a company executive says your music doesn't match the company's sonic identity, that's not a suggestion for revision. That's a rejection of your entire creative direction. It means your artistic instincts are wrong. It means you need to go back and make something that fits inside the existing box. And most trainees, hell, most established artists, would have recalibrated. They would have softened the edges, lowered the distortion, smoothed out the aggression, produced something that earned the approving nod and the green light. Changbin did the opposite. He doubled down. Not recklessly, not with blind stubbornness, but with the methodical determination of someone who genuinely believed that the music he was making was not just good, it was necessary. And his argument, when you strip away the studio politics and the corporate dynamics, was devastatingly simple. If Stray Kids sounds exactly like every other JYP group, why does Stray Kids need to exist? That question, that single, surgically precise question is the nuclear weapon that Changbin deployed against 20 years of JYP sonic tradition. Because he wasn't saying the existing JYP sound was bad. He wasn't disrespecting Twice or GOT7 or anyone else. He was pointing out a market reality that even Park Jin-young couldn't argue with. Differentiation isn't just an artistic preference, it's a survival strategy. In a K-pop landscape that was becoming increasingly saturated, another smooth, polished, safe-sounding boy group from JYP would have been invisible. The industry didn't need another group that sounded pleasant. It needed a group that sounded like a punch to the sternum, and Changbin had been building that punch since before he even knew it had a purpose. The noise music label is where this story gets really interesting, because that term, intended as a criticism by Korean music critics who found Stray Kids' early output too abrasive, too loud, too much, became the defining badge of honor for the group's identity, and Changbin was the primary reason it stuck. When critics called Stray Kids noise music, most PR teams would have panicked. Most company executives would have course-corrected, softened the next release, tried to rehabilitate the group's sonic image with something more mainstream-friendly. But Changbin saw that label for what it really was, proof that what they were doing was genuinely different, genuinely challenging, genuinely impossible to ignore. And instead of retreating, he leaned in harder. God's Menu wasn't an accident. That track, with its aggressive brass stabs, its neck-snapping beat switch, its absolutely feral energy, was Changbin and 3RACHA essentially writing a response letter to every critic who called them noise. The letter said, "You're right. We are noise. And we're about to make noise the biggest thing in K-pop." And they did. God's Menu wasn't just a hit, it was a paradigm shift. It proved that aggressive, high-intensity, sonically confrontational music could chart, could trend, could dominate music shows, could convert millions of casual listeners into devoted fans. And that success retroactively validated every single creative battle Changbin had fought behind closed doors at JYP. Every demo that was flagged as too much. Every beat that was called too aggressive. Every production that was told it doesn't sound like JYP. All of it was vindicated in the chart numbers, the streaming figures, the sold-out arenas, the cultural impact that can't be faked or manufactured. But what makes Changbin's rebellion truly exceptional, what separates it from simple artistic stubbornness, is the technical rigor behind it. Changbin doesn't just produce aggressive music because he likes loud sounds. His production work demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of sonic architecture that goes far beyond what most idol producers achieve. The way he layers distortion frequencies to create texture rather than chaos. The way he structures his rap verses to build tension through rhythmic acceleration before releasing it in a melodic hook. The way he uses silence, actual, physical silence in the middle of the most intense tracks as a dynamic tool that makes the aggression hit harder by contrast. This is someone who studied the science of sound impact with the seriousness of an acoustic engineer, and the technical quality of his work made it exponentially harder for JYP's team to dismiss his creative direction as mere youthful noise. You can argue with taste. You can overrule preference. But you can't argue with technical excellence that demonstrates a deeper understanding of the craft than the standard template accounts for. There's also Changbin's rap delivery itself, which exists in a category that JYP Entertainment had literally never encountered before. Korean rap within idol groups has traditionally been functional. It exists to add rhythmic variety to songs, to provide a contrast to the vocal sections, to give certain members their showcase moments. Changbin turned the rap sections of Stray Kids songs into the centerpieces. His speed is almost mechanically precise. Number 1, Bang Chan, the leader who fought the empire and built a kingdom inside it. This is it. The summit. The name that every single person watching already suspected would be here, but doesn't fully understand why until you hear the whole story, because Bang Chan's rebellion against Park Jin-young isn't a chapter in Stray Kids history, it is the history. Without this rebellion, there is no Stray Kids. Without this man's stubborn, exhausting, nearly self-destructive refusal to accept what JYP Entertainment told him was possible, 8 incredibly talented human beings would have scattered into the wind, and the 4th generation of K-pop would be missing its most revolutionary act. Christopher Bang, born October 3, 1997, in Sydney, Australia, entered JYP Entertainment as a trainee in 2010. He was 13 years old. Let that number breathe for a moment, 13. A child walked into one of the most demanding entertainment systems on the planet and began a journey that would consume the entirety of his adolescence, his teenage years, and the early years of his adulthood before he ever stepped on a stage as a debuted artist. 7 years. Bang Chan trained at JYP Entertainment for 7 years. In an industry where the average training period is 2 to 3 years, Chan endured 7. 7 years of evaluations. 7 years of being told not yet. 7 years of watching other trainees, some who arrived after him, get selected for debut groups while he remained in the practice room. He watched GOT7 form and debut. He watched Twice form and debut. He watched trainee after trainee get their moment while the system kept him in a holding pattern with no clear timeline and no guaranteed outcome. Most human beings would have broken. Most would have quit after year 3, year 4, maybe year 5 at the absolute maximum. The psychological toll of existing in a state of perpetual almost good enough, almost ready, almost selected, is a kind of slow erosion that destroys people from the inside. But Chan didn't break and he didn't quit, and the reason he didn't quit is the reason he sits at #1 on this list, because somewhere during those 7 years, Bang Chan stopped waiting for JYP to give him an opportunity and started building one himself. The formation of Stray Kids was not JYP Entertainment's idea. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Stray Kids, as a concept, as a group, as a collection of these specific 8 human beings, was Bang Chan's vision. He didn't audition for a pre-formed group. He didn't get slotted into a lineup that executives assembled in a conference room. He went to Park Jin-young and essentially said, "I've been here for 7 years. I know every trainee in this building. I know who's talented. I know who works hard. I know who has the hunger. Let me build the group." The audacity of that proposal is almost incomprehensible when you understand the power dynamics at play. Trainees don't build groups. Trainees don't select members. Trainees don't walk into the office of the man whose name is literally on the building and pitch a creative vision for an entirely new act. That's not how the system works. That's not how any K-pop system has ever worked. But Chan did it, and the fact that JYP even entertained the conversation tells you something about the respect Chan had earned through 7 years of relentless, undeniable excellence. And also about the sheer force of will that this man carries in his chest like a second heartbeat. But JYP didn't just say yes. Of course he didn't. Park Jin-young is a businessman, and businessmen don't hand creative control to 20-year-old trainees without a safety net. Hence the survival show Stray Kids, the reality program that would test Chan's group concept under public scrutiny, with the implicit threat that members could be eliminated if they didn't meet the standard. And this is where Chan's rebellion shifted from ambitious to heroic, because the survival show wasn't designed to validate his vision, it was designed to stress test it to the point of failure, and Chan knew it. When members were eliminated during the show, when Lino was cut, when Felix was cut, when I.N was flagged as not ready, Chan didn't accept those decisions as final. He fought. Publicly, privately, in meetings that cameras captured and meetings that they didn't. He argued for his members with the desperation of someone who understood that this wasn't just about individual trainees being removed from a lineup. It was about the integrity of the group he had envisioned, the chemistry he had identified, the specific combination of personalities and talents that he believed was irreplaceable. And this is the part that makes the story legendary. He was right. Every member who was eliminated and brought back in significant part because of Chan's advocacy, went on to become essential to Stray Kids' identity and success. Felix, who was cut for his Korean, became one of the most globally recognized K-pop idols on Earth. Lino, who was eliminated, became the group's dance cornerstone and one of its most beloved personalities. I.N, who was questioned, grew into a vocalist whose evolution is one of the most compelling arcs in the group's narrative. Chan saw what JYP's evaluation system couldn't, that talent isn't just about individual metrics, it's about how people amplify each other, and his group needed all 8 pieces to be complete. That kind of vision, defended against institutional authority, with everything on the line, isn't just rebellion. It's leadership in its purest, most primal form. Then came the battle for self-production, and this is where Chan's rebellion moved from the personal to the structural, from fighting for his members to fighting for his music. JYP Entertainment, historically, has maintained significant control over the creative process for its groups. Songs are written by in-house producers or commissioned from established songwriters. The company's A&R team selects title tracks. The creative direction flows from the top down. Chan looked at that model and said, "We write our own music." Not, "We'd like to contribute sometimes." Not, "Maybe we can co-write a B-side for the next album." He said, "Three Racha, me, Changbin, and Han, we produce the music, we write the lyrics, we control the creative direction." In 2018, at JYP Entertainment, that was an insane ask. No group in the company's history had been given that level of creative autonomy at debut. None. The closest comparison was Day 6, and even they operated within a more collaborative framework with company producers. Chan was asking for something unprecedented, and he was asking for it not as a proven hitmaker, but as a trainee who had never released a commercial track. What you just witnessed wasn't just a countdown. It was a map of how creative resistance operates at every level of an institution as powerful as JYP Entertainment. From the quietest ripple to the loudest explosion, each member of Stray Kids found their own frequency of rebellion, and together, those frequencies created something the K-pop industry had never heard before. Here's the thing that makes this entire ranking more than just entertainment trivia. Not a single one of these rebellions was destructive. Nobody burned bridges. Nobody disrespected the institution that gave them their platform. Nobody confused rebellion with ingratitude. What Stray Kids did, collectively and individually, was something far more sophisticated and far more powerful. They expanded the definition of what JYP Entertainment could be. They didn't tear down the house. They added rooms that the original architect never imagined, and those rooms turned out to be the ones everyone wanted to live in. Park Jin-young built an empire on discipline, craft, and a specific vision of what pop music should sound and feel like. Bang Chan and his 7 members walked into that empire and said, "What if it could be more?" And the answer, written in platinum records, sold-out world tours, and a fanbase that spans every continent, is that yes, it could. It could be so much more. That's the real lesson buried inside this ranking. Rebellion isn't about destruction. It's about expansion. It's about refusing to accept that the current boundaries are permanent, and having the courage, the talent, and the stubbornness to prove that there's a whole universe waiting on the other side of no. Stray Kids didn't just rebel against Park Jin-young, they made him proud in ways he never planned for. And if that isn't the most beautiful kind of rebellion there is, I don't know what is.